I actually have a thing that says that. Sorry for being myself. All right, we're on. We are recording. So I'm going to get us set up and you're going to stall by talking to people.
All right. I am waiting for usually I have a little thing in the corner of my YouTube that pops up and it says, Episcopal Church of the Redeemer is live now.
Ooh.
Yeah,
I
because
just got mine.
I have the notification set up. But good morning to all of you who are joining us this morning and to those who might be joining us later. This is Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. We are coming to you live what day is it? Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central.
And live. What day is it?
I don't know. It's that second day in the week.
Yeah.
I, like many people, we were kind of snowed in last week, and time truly has sort of lost all meaning.
You keep saying it and then it keeps losing more meaning.
I know, it was I was freaking out yesterday, or Sunday and yesterday. I was like, oh my gosh, all these things didn't get done last week. Our checks didn't get sent out and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you know what? Nobody got anything done last week. We didn't get our mail delivered last week because
our trash people came a day later.
Yeah. It's I was so stressed out about not doing my part, but I was like, even if I had done my part, the end result would have been the same. Nobody would have gotten their checks because the mail wasn't being delivered or picked up or whatever. So anyway, today is Tuesday, February 23rd. We are here coming to you live. I am Kira Austin Young, priest in charge of St. Anne's Episcopal Church in Nashville.
I'm Philip DeVaul, and I'm rector of Church of the Redeemer in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we got some folks joining us already.
All right.
So, good morning to Leslie. Good morning to Lisa Grubbs. Good morning, Ed Eubank. Ed is a friend and a member of the church, and might be Ed's first time joining us, at least his first time checking in. So welcome, Ed. And Gary Lubin's here. He's our deacon, and he points out we are in Kairos, which is This is a podcast type. It's not a podcast, but it's a whatever we are. It's a show for church nerds. Mm-hmm. So having a church nerd come on and say we are in Kairos is just the sweet spot of what we do. God's time, my friends. That's Greek for God's time.
Yeah.
So I have a friend and colleague and mentor who would say, here we sit in eternity. Mm. And it's just annoying enough, but also just true enough, So yeah, last week we were snowed in. Mm-hmm. Everything was weird and time has no meaning, as you said. I mentioned last week that I have a daughter who had surgery. So I literally from Thursday till today, I almost don't know what happened on what day and what and my daughter and I, the way that we've dealt with her recovery is just by watching a ton of Marvel movies.
Oh, fun.
Yes.
That's fun.
How did you survive the snowing and the ridiculousness? What way did you engage in pop culture or some other kind of ad hoc self-care?
Okay, this is going to sound really nerdy, but
you're in a safe space for that.
A few weeks ago, maybe not even a few weeks ago, again, I don't know about time, but my husband bought a bird feeder to put outside of our front window for the cats, so that the cats could have cat TV and attract the birds and the cats could watch the birds.
Yeah.
Except here is what happened. Now we watch the birds. And I have become very invested in the goings on at our bird feeder and have begun to, I'm not a bird person. Yeah. I'm not this is not a thing that I have, been into in the past.
Yeah.
In fact, I was always kind of what's a bird's a bird, right?
Right.
But there's something about and of course I'm in Nashville. We don't often get a lot of snow. And we actually got a legit snow.
Right.
And so to watch these birds in the snow and these beautiful, the bright red cardinals, against the white snow, and it was kind of gray, like this sort of mono background and these bright cardinals. It was definitely like a thing that kind of got me through getting snowed in. And we also we went on some kind of walks around the neighborhood. We live near a school with like a good hill, and that's kind of where everybody goes to sled when it snows.
Did you go sledding?
I did, and I went down the hill twice, and I managed to bruise my tailbone.
That's why I hate sledding. I don't like anything where you might break something when you're doing it. I'm just not like my version of sports is like bocce ball, like anything. I like any kind of sport where you can smoke a cigar while doing it. We took our kids sledding the day after the first we had 2 big snowstorms in Cincinnati, and the day after the first big one, we took them sledding. And I just was like, I know that this is me being a good dad. I mean, not like Ted Cruz level good dad. I didn't take them to Cancun, but like I tried to be a good dad, like take them out and do the thing.
Right.
And I'm like, how many times do I, in my head, I'm like, how many times do I have to go down with them? Like, to have like checked the box of we've sledded.
Yeah.
And when my middle child was like, after like a half hour, was like, I'm done. Can we go? And I was like, no, we got to stay outside a little longer. There were people around. We haven't been around people.
I know.
But I was like, no, we've got, and so he like did other things and played in the snow, but I was secretly like, oh God, that's one less kid that wants to sled. Okay, good. Okay. Like just check them off.
Knock the other 2 off.
And everywhere you go sledding, this one spot, it's on the back of this hill in my neighborhood, and you go sledding, and at the bottom there's just these big trees, and it's like you might hit a tree. So part of sledding is teaching the person who's sledding when to bail out so as not to go into a street or into a tree or into a fence.
Yeah.
Anyways, Leslie points out we're all secretly cats because we all just want to watch the birds.
Yeah, just like stare outside and watch the birds.
It is wonderful. The only reason we don't do it more is there's just not more of them.
Yeah.
But I get it. I get it. I remember when we moved to New Hampshire and my dad started cutting oranges in half and putting them on the back. And I was like, is this some weird religious, what is this? Because he became Unitarian. And I don't know what they do. So
right.
Like maybe they cut oranges in half and offer them up to the earth god. I don't know. And he was like, no, this is how you attract Orioles. And I was like, is Cal Ripken going to show up in my backyard? But I was doing dad jokes at 16.
Yeah.
But like literally you cut an orange in half and stick them in the back in certain areas of the country and Orioles will show up and I was like, and I thought it was so dumb till I saw one. And I was like, okay, this is cool. This is amazing. So, yeah. Every time I see a cardinal, like a bright red cardinal or like a blue jay, I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah. There are some downy woodpeckers that I have begun to identify. And my office is on the second floor, kind of out also at the front of our house. Yeah. So like I get the like tree view of the birds up here and like the feeder view of the birds is downstairs. So
are you becoming a birder?
So there is a subset of weird Anglican Twitter that are birders.
You've said weird Anglican Twitter before, and I think like Anglican Twitter, like the weird is just superfluous.
Yeah.
But like you had me at weird, but go ahead.
But there's like a subsection that are like pretty passionate birders and, go on like birding trips and, talk about birds. And I think there is something, like with some hobbies, there's something sort of intrinsically spiritual about bird watching. And like, I'm not saying like I always kind of understood it or I'm going to go on a vacation just to like hunt for birds or look for birds. But it is very like, you are in the moment, you are paying attention, you are kind of cultivating these things that we talk about wanting to cultivate in our spiritual lives, in our prayer lives. Yeah. And I think that's one way of kind of practicing that isn't like, this is about Jesus, but it's still the same, like you're working those same muscles.
For us to find ways to learn how to be reverent in God's creation, right?
Yeah.
What Reverend Lovejoy once called the cheap showiness of nature. But like, I think that's right. And I am, especially because of the pandemic. Like I'm finding the need for more quiet. I'm not a very quiet person, as anyone who knows me knows, not just in terms of my own nonstop talking, but in terms of like, if I'm not talking, I'm listening to music or watching, like there's always noise, and I'm working on that. I'm finding the need for more quiet, and I'm finding those spaces. But like the idea of just watching birds, like, sounds beautiful, right? But you just reminded me that Weird Anglican Twitter is a thing, and it just, I always am. I really thought when I became Episcopalian that I had like found my people, and then when I realized that I was going to be a priest, I sort of felt like, oh, good, I'm going to meet a bunch of other people that are like me. And then I went to seminary. And I was like, no one, I was like, said something about The Sopranos. No one had seen The Sopranos. And the biggest show on TV when I went to seminary, the biggest hit was Lost. And there was only one other person at the seminary when I was there who watched Lost. Think about that. And I was like, anybody want to watch Lost? And they were like, huh? No, we're heading over to Sandy's room to watch some episodes of Vicar of Dibley on DVD. And I was like, I don't know what I've done. Like, what have I done? But the person, and then the person who watched Lost graduated, but was replaced by someone who, one of the person who introduced us, Meg.
Yeah.
An actual person who watched normal actual television and listened to normal actual music and had understood pop culture in the world. It was, and not just British crime shows and birds. I was very delighted. I was very delighted. So I've now alienated myself from 75% of our colleagues, but I don't work for them, so that's fine.
Right.
Anyways, Weird Anglican Twitter. Thank God. We have, speaking of Weird Anglican stuff, that's our bread and butter. We're church nerds. You and
we
me.
are.
And we've gotten asked some pretty wonderful church nerdy questions. One of them is like, I think just fun. The other one I think is like it's going to require work on our part. And I don't know if I know the answer. So we've got two questions for you guys today. Remember, you all give us questions. You either send them to us or you write them in the chat. If anything comes up, we'll try to address it. But I'd like, if with your permission, Kira, I'd like to read the first question.
Go for it. Yeah. And here's what we're going to actually try to do today. We do sort of want to keep this first discussion like a little bit time limited so we can get to the second question. So we haven't always been good about in the past.
I'm going to see where we are. I'm going to give us 10 minutes and see how we do.
Okay.
Here's the question. It's from our friend, longtime listener and many time contributor, Lisa. Here's her question. Last week, you mentioned something about high church, she puts in quotations, that you were high church only in theology. What I actually said, just for clarification, was that I tend towards Anglo-Catholicism in my theology, but in practice, I'm actually pretty low church. I'm like a low church Anglo-Catholic, which to people, church nerds like me and Kira, sounds to many like an oxymoron. But just for clarification about what I said, but your question still stands, and we're going to get into it. I'd enjoy hearing about high church versus low church. In our small Chicago suburb, we had both, and it always puzzled me. How are things decided? By a bishop, a vestry, the priest? What does it mean to be low church theologically versus high church? What actions and symbolisms are done in high church? Is our cathedral occasionally high church in a service? So those are sort of her questions. She also mentioned that she really loved the book The Lamb, which was mentioned, the Gospel According to Biff, which was mentioned last week. And she had some other book suggestions, good suggestions for Jesus books that don't require too much concentration. You had one right away, so let's just get that out of the way. What's your recommendation for a good Jesus book?
Yeah, I mentioned it last week, but I didn't have the name of it at the tip of my tongue, but it's called Unholy Night by Seth Grahame-Smith, who also wrote Abraham Lincoln, Zombie Hunter.
Vampire Hunter.
Vampire Hunter.
Phenomenal book, by the way.
And the other one, which is like Jane Eyre and Zombies or something
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies.
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And so he wrote this book called Unholy Night, which is sort of the tale of, it's a nativity, it's a magi tale, the three wise men, from a different angle. So it's Jesus is there. It's sort of more about the Magi, but definitely a good read. Again, a little late, a little irreverent. Definitely will get you thinking about, again, that kind of, like we were talking about, sort of biblical fan fiction. The characters you know and love, but with a little more edge to them, a little more fleshed out story.
Like Monty Python Life of Brian.
Yes.
But this is going with the Magi. I like it. So that's your book suggestion, An Unholy Night.
Mm-hmm.
So high church versus low church. Is this a theology thing? Who decides what? How does it work? What actions and symbolisms are done in high church? Is our cathedral occasionally high church in a service, etc.?
Etc.
Kira, I trust you way more than I trust myself to answer this question.
Hey.
I just think I'm too casual with words.
Okay.
Talk to us a little bit about your understanding of the difference between high church and low church.
So I want to kind of, without getting way deep into sort of the history of the Anglican Church, I do sort of want to say that, like, prior to what we might call the, like, gender and sexuality wars in the church, in the Episcopal Church, this was the main division of the church, whether you were sort of low church evangelical or high church Anglo-Catholic. And there are still seminaries that, kind of find themselves in each of those camps. Nashotah House is kind of known as the Anglo-Catholic seminary. Virginia Theological Seminary has a long tradition of being kind of the evangelical low church seminary.
That's where I went.
That's that has shifted, I think, a little bit. It's not quite as important to their identity as it sort of used to be. But even just
now, they're just the seminary with all the money.
Yeah.
It's a different identity.
Yeah, I mean, entire dioceses were kind of, had their place in each camp. Again, the Diocese of Virginia has kind of long been a lower church diocese, where the upper Midwest, the Diocese of Fond du Lac, all those are even known as the Beretta Belt, the sort of like high church Anglo-Catholic segment of the Episcopal Church. So it may be hard for us to kind of wrap our minds around now, because, like, we're all sort of one church. I'm a fairly broad church leaning in my, like, actual practice. And so, whether
you've introduced a new phrase, broad church.
Oh, no.
So we're going to define. So Lisa, we are going to define low church, high church, and broad church for you today.
Yeah. But to know that was, like, one of the, not founding, but a very important division in the life of the church for a long time. And people really, like, had their camps. And if you go back to kind of looking at, like, the process of putting together the 1979 prayer book, some of the theology, some of the practices, the rubrics and stuff in there, are products of that kind of debate and that let's go with debate.
Cold War.
But so to think about high church and low church, or Anglo-Catholic and evangelical, of course, we kind of think about the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church generally, as this via media. You may have heard that phrase before, this middle way in between sort of a Reformed theology, the kind of Calvinistic, maybe even Lutheran, theology, and kind of and Roman Catholicism. So we have kind of carved out this middle way for ourselves. Within that middle way, of course, there are a lot of variation, and some people tend more towards the Roman Catholic leaning, whether that's in their actual, piety, the practices they do, the prayer practices they do, their theology, and some people tend more towards the Reformed, the evangelical, the low church end, where what is more important to their spiritual life, their prayer life, where they might decide to go to church, is like Bible study, and the sermon is the priest a good preacher. Whereas somebody who is maybe more Anglo-Catholic, more high church, is more focused on, the Eucharist and the sacraments. And, if you go to a high church or an Anglo-Catholic church, you're going to expect maybe more incense, more chanting, there is a difference between, is the priest celebrating the Eucharist facing away from the congregation ad orientem, or are they facing towards the congregation ad populum? So there are a lot of things that might tip you off to what church is what.
High church generally has more accessories.
Yes.
They don't call them accessories. They call them necessities, but
Yeah.
they're liturgical finery and accoutrement,
With the understanding that there is something tangible, there is something
Yes.
sacramental, there's a focus on beauty and a drawing of if we approach and take in this beauty that is bringing us closer to God.
Right.
Whereas kind of a low church point of view would be like, none of that stuff matters. It's all a waste of money, maybe.
And I'm speaking as a person who's been low church and who dabbles in both, goes back and forth. Like, low church has a skepticism of the higher church things that they actually distract us from, the experience of God. Has been one critique of high churchdom, right? But I would say some of the arguments for high church for me are like a ritual that captures mystery and requires whole body. That low church can be really intellectual centric, brain centric, reason centric, and word centric. And the need for us to worship God with not just our mind, but also our body, to, as Lisa said, to bow, to kneel, to cross yourself, to use water, to engage in the senses with incense, to recognize the importance of partaking of the body and blood, not just from an intellectual understanding, but from an incarnational, that is to say, an experience, the experiential aspect of it. That there is one of my favorite religious words. It's that there's an ineffable reality. I don't like that word for the right reasons. I just think it's a funny word, but like the intangible, like tangible physically, but intangible intellectually, engaging in that can make some of our low church folks nervous. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know if we've really defined it terribly well yet, but I do want to get into a little bit more of the theological rather than kind of the practical, because the high church, the sort of Anglo-Catholic theology really leans towards, the church is the body of Christ, and the church is the bride of Christ, that God, right, that Christ is the foundation of the church. And the low church is a little more towards like, the church is great, the church is where we kind of come together as a community to do these things, but it's also more of a like human institution.
Right.
So those and same with like the sacraments, like even kind of working outside of the Episcopal Church. If you think about more low church, more evangelical, Baptists, even Methodists, their view of the sacrament is more of it as it's a remembrance meal. It's it's nothing really happens in the bread and wine. It's just kind of, it's a ritual. It's something that we do, but it's not the presence of Christ in the bread and wine the way someone with a more Catholic theology of the Eucharist would think of it.
And often a more low church person will emphasize scriptures more heavily. And you will often have a more of an emphasis on sola scriptura as a shorthand for saying that the Bible is the main authority or the sole authority on doctrine. And so that's where it's connected to that evangelical nature and that reformed nature. And so we have those tensions. And then so how would you define broad church?
I would say broad church is that kind of like middle.
It is messy.
It's and is comfortable. I mean, I would define myself as kind of comfortable with both ends. I mean, maybe leaning more towards the Anglo-Catholic side. I mean, I love chanting. I love good incense, but there are certain, I mean, right now there are so many churches that you can kind of go to online And I have attended on my days off and stuff, some very high Anglo-Catholic churches. And I'm like, what is happening in here?
Right.
I don't even know.
Right.
You know, and there is a part of Anglo-Catholicism that makes me feel very self-conscious, like, oh, I'm never going to do this right.
That's right.
And I think that's where like you're kind of feel like your discomfort with it is
100%.
like, oh, if I don't bow at the right time, like God isn't going to show up, which
I know they don't believe.
Yeah.
But there's, okay, so I'm allergic to preciousness. I get hives, I get itchy, and I get angry. Like, I don't handle preciousness well. And I don't handle preciousness around Jesus very well, because Jesus, who was extremely reverent to the Father and reverent to the dignity of humanity and the purpose for his presence, was also not interested in preciousness for its own sake, or ritual, anything for its own sake, right? Like in terms of like making sure. And so when I became part of the Episcopal Church, and you go to some place and you find, and I go, and they had incense, and I was like, man, this smells cool. Oh, I like this. And it became connected to how I worshiped. And then I found out, well, but that's a broad church that's using incense. They don't really know why they're using it. What? I didn't know why I was using it, but I liked it. Like, I walked into this church as a Missouri Synod Lutheran who left church for a number of years, came back into the Episcopal Church. And I walked in, and there was a baptismal font at the entrance, and people were dipping their hands and crossing them and putting it on their foreheads. And I was like, all right, I'll try that. No one told me to, and no one told me what it meant. I just did it. And I got into crossing myself and trying to reverence, bow my head when Jesus' name is mentioned in the liturgy and things like that, almost as an experiential reality more than anything else. But then I found out that the church that I was a part of, like that wearing an alb and a cassock alb, where you just throw a robe over your what you're wearing now, as opposed to putting on a cassock and then an amice and then a this and a that and a doobity-bop, that was somehow not enough. And I was and I'm going to be like, that infuriates me. It's childish. Now, what I've come to a place where, if someone is wearing an alb and an amice and a this and a that and the other thing, I'm not mad at them. Like, I'm not like, you shouldn't be doing that.
Right. Like, that's their thing. That's what they want to do. That's fine.
But when it comes to like being like any time someone is made to feel less than, or like not churchy enough, right? Or as one guy in seminary used to call me, a mudblood, because I wasn't a cradle Episcopalian.
Wow.
Right? Like he was joking. And also,
but there's also always some truth in
that's
jokes.
Right. That's right. That's right. And so, there's a part of me that just, I don't do well with that. But Anglo-Catholic churches take the rite of reconciliation or confession seriously. They take their being church seriously. They take the sacraments seriously. A good friend of mine who's not a clergy person, who's now Episcopalian but grew up in the Catholic Church, pointed out to me, Jesus didn't create a Bible. He did create a church. And I take that really seriously. And so that's where I find myself resonating with Anglo-Catholic theology. But I get really, really nervous when I start to see, like I've said before, like people posting pictures of themselves on Facebook with their hands like this, in like perfect, perfectly laid out, like, or pictures, too many pictures of vestments. And I have friends that do that. So if they, I'm not, I have to be careful, because I love our friends. I have, it hits a part of me where I'm just like, who is this for? That's bad grammar though. So for whom is this? but who is this for? Like,
yeah. I think that's where, like, in terms of being broad church, especially for those of us who are maybe in the younger generations of the church and didn't kind of like go through ordination, or like, in this kind of world where like these were the defining characteristics of the church.
Yep.
Is that we do sort of see the beauty in both sides and want to kind of bring them together. Like, I wish Episcopalians knew the Bible more and were, were more interested in Bible study and Bible, and not Bible study in the like, let's learn more about the Bible kind of intellectually, but more interested in how does the Bible, influence my life, and what is it teaching? How is God speaking to me through the scriptures? Right. And in the same way, like, I think the reverence for the liturgy and the sacrament. We didn't get to talk about this in Advent, but I am a big, Mary person, like Marian devotion, Marian piety is a big kind of Anglo-Catholic thing. And, and part of the beauty of the Episcopal Church is like, if you want to like pray the rosary and you want to have like devotions to the Virgin Mary, like you can do that. And if you think it's weird and that doesn't work for you, that's fine too. Like nobody's gonna like make you do it. So I would say most Episcopal churches that I have gone to in my life have been definitely in that broad church space of like, they'll occasionally use incense, probably not every Sunday. They'll chant things on big holidays and stuff, but not every Sunday. Our cathedral here in Nashville is designed as a very Anglo-Catholic space, and the dean there is definitely Anglo-Catholic in his theology and his piety, but the congregation sort of isn't. Right. We're Southern, and a lot of people come to the Episcopal Church from Baptist or Church of Christ. Right. And so that question of who decides is a really interesting one. Some churches, it's just sort of in their blood. It's in their history of like, this is the kind of church we are. This is the kind of church we've always been. And others, I never think it's a very good idea for a cleric to kind of impose their piety on a congregation.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's a terrible idea.
But like at my church, maybe about half of the congregation crosses themselves and the other half has no interest in it. And like, that's fine. If it works for you.
Who decides? The answer is always the congregation. And you might move the needle a little bit one way or the other over a long tenure, but clergy people who spend their time trying to make their church more high church or more low church end up banging their heads against the wall. And as soon as they leave, the church reverts back, because the culture of a church, of a particular congregation is much older than you. And it was there long before you, and it'll be there long after you're gone. My very first job out of seminary, they called me Father DeVaul. And I was like the guy in seminary who's like, no one's ever calling me Father. That was me. I was that guy. I was like, I may not wear a collar. I swear to you. That's how I was like, I'm never going to wear a collar. Like, this is all blah, blah. My first job out of seminary, it was at a school. All the teachers went by their last names, right? I mean, you go to school, teachers are Mr. this, Mrs. that, Dr. this, Professor that. And so I was like, well, then all the priests were father. So I was Father DeVaul, not Father Phil. And I wore my collar every day, because I was my uniform basically for working. Because I was a chaplain, and my boss was like, you got to collar up every day. Like, this is the job. So collar every day, Father DeVaul for 2 years straight. My next place, I still wore the collar all the time, but then I became Father Phil. And the priest before me was Mother Barbara, right? And now I'm here, and the number of people who call me Father anything could be counted on one hand. I mean, it happens. It's not never, but I'm Phil here. And that was not because I told them, but I also don't fight it. This is, I point to the church that has been, the building that's been closed for a year, but it's right over here. That's who they are, who they are. Yeah. So that's kind of who decides that. And Lisa, no, Redeemer has not done incense, at least since not just me, but the rector before me. I believe 2 rectors ago, there may have been incense. your clergy would love, not just me, other members of your clergy would love for there to be incense from time to time at Redeemer. Kira, we just introduced the Great Vigil of Easter 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, it's I was telling one of my friends from seminary, like, it's funny. They think I'm high church. I'm not high church because I cross myself and bow at Jesus' name during the Eucharistic prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyways, but all that's to say, the bells ringing at the church office. Someone else got it. Okay. All that's to say, for me, high church, low church, they both have, and broad church all have a place. And I think for you as well. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's about Jesus to me.
Yes. I think that's the thing that we need to always like come back to is like, is what we're doing, is what we're emphasizing, is it bringing us closer to God?
Right.
Is it glorifying God?
Yep.
Is it facilitating, as priests and worship leaders, is it facilitating the worship for the people in our pews? And that is what is most important to me. Like, whether it's liturgical dance or whether it's incense and chanting, like, if that thing is glorifying God and bringing people closer to God and helping them enter into worshiping the almighty creator of everything that is, then it's doing what it needs to do.
Yep. Two things really quickly, and then we are going to move on. One is that Leslie pointed out that she thinks that during Martin, she said, which was the interim before, not me, but the interim before the last rector. So probably in 2000, in Easter of 2002 was probably when they had the last time they had incense at my church. Okay. and someone asked really quickly, like Gary asked about, in terms of high church, low church, what about the politics of ordination of women, et cetera? Can we hold off on that question until next week?
Yeah.
That's big. I think next week we're going to do a little bit more high church, low church talk, Gary, but we're going to talk about sort of like social issues and where they tend to fit within these parameters, because I believe they've changed.
Yes, I would say that's definitely true.
And so that'll be an interesting shift that we should talk about, but that'll take the rest of the time. And we've got a question. We've already taken more time than I thought we would. That could be our slogan. So we have a question from one of our listeners about how our church understands itself as LGBTQ plus inclusive, and what that looks like. And our church, meaning the Episcopal Church, right? And we are a church that now has not only do we allow for same-sex marriage, not just blessings, but marriage, but we actually, according to national church constitutions and canons, all dioceses have to allow for it. Now, it used to be even that a certain diocese a bishop could say, we're not doing that in my diocese. But now, if you are an Episcopalian, you have to, in some way, shape, or form, allow for a same-sex marriage to happen in your diocese, in your right, and you can't forbid your priests from doing it. And we now have it written in the constitutions and canons that that no one based on sexual orientation or gender identity can be excluded from any level of ministry, ordained ministry, simply based on that. They could be excluded for other reasons. They could just be terrible people, but not based on the fact that they be a person who's trans, or who is gender non-binary, or is gay or bi, or anything like that. Am I getting this all right so far?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So the question comes from one of our listeners, and it's a multiple choice. It's a multiple point question. Is it possible, they ask, to have a church that welcomes LGBT people and people who believe that marriage is between and people who believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that sexual activity outside of those bounds is sinful? In other words, can the Episcopal Church be welcoming, truly welcoming of LGBTQ plus persons, and also truly welcoming of people who have that more, I don't like the word traditional, because I think if you're going to talk about traditional marriage, then you're talking about me buying women and having multiple wives. That's traditional biblical marriage, but we'll get into that another time. Those who believe that marriage,
my bishop refers to it as how the church has traditionally understood marriage.
That's actually good language, right? So the church has traditionally understood marriage as between a man and a woman, and that sexual activity outside of those bounds is sinful. That is the way that the Christian church has, across denominations and cultures, has traditionally acted and understood for, as far as we know, a very, very long time. So is it possible for a church to be welcoming of LGBTQ plus persons and also genuinely welcoming of people who hold to the sort of traditional Christian understanding of marriage as between a man and a woman and sexual activity outside of those bounds as sinful? Okay. There's two other questions that are connected, but let's just start there. Can we be welcoming truly to this both and? And I'm immediately going to point to you.
Yeah. I always find these questions, first of all, to say a little bit about my experience in the Episcopal Church. I grew up in the Diocese of Dallas. I went through my ordination process in the Diocese of Texas, and I currently serve in the Diocese of Tennessee. All three of those dioceses are center to right in the in their understanding of sexuality in the Episcopal Church. Right. So I haven't had these experiences of like the people who in the Diocese of Massachusetts or the Diocese of LA or so when people are kind of like, is there room for these kind of people in the church? I'm like, yes, they're already here. Like there are a lot of churches in my current diocese, in my previous diocese,
right,
who would absolutely understand and welcome parishioners, clergy, bishops, whomever, whose understanding of sexual ethics conforms to the traditional Christian understanding. So I think the question comes up sort of the like denominational level. Like, what does this mean? And at what point do we start to say, this is who we are as a church, and this is what we value, and one of these things can no longer hold? I mean, I think that's sort of where we ended up with women's ordination, which was like, right, okay, we're going to like wait for people to get on board.
Right.
And eventually the people who aren't really on board, like, you kind of need to, put up or shut up,
Right. Right. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
This is tricky, and I don't want to sound insensitive. However, we create a structure, we make a decision, we make structural decisions. It sounds so like heady and impersonal, but we make systemic decisions that as a system, the system is going to say that the system is going to guarantee that LGBTQ plus persons are going to be treated with the same dignity as straight people. Straight, sorry for that language, but cishet, whatever, right?
Yeah.
By guaranteeing that, we're going to say like, you look, and we're going to say, as you just said, we're going to have female priests and gender non-binary priests and gender queer priests and gay priests and bisexual priests. That's all possible within our denomination. And so you're free to come to this church and believe whatever you want about sexual identity and sexual ethics. Just understand that you're becoming part of a thing that on a systemic level, on a structural level, is affirming of these positions.
Yeah.
And is going to act, because these people are historically, and not just historically, but currently marginalized, is going to act in an advocating fashion. So it's tricky, because on one hand, the answer is, yeah, of course you're welcome. And also, to say that they are welcome means something different than to say that you are welcome.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to say that we are going to be welcoming to people who are LGBTQ plus affirming and to LGBTQ plus people is not equal to saying we're going to be welcoming of people who hold a traditional Christian marriage point of view, because people who hold a traditional Christian point of view of marriage have been in power and have been the norm for the history of American Christianity. And so we have to hold a different kind of space. Am I making sense here? This is really hard for me to talk about.
Yeah. So I mean, for those of you who don't follow like the national politics of the church and don't know which bishops are where, my bishop is not LGBTQ affirming. He was one of the holdouts in terms of allowing his priests to celebrate and bless same-sex marriages. And that has been a point of contention with my parish, has long been a very LGBTQ affirming place, has long been at Pride and all those things, has been very public about their belief. And so, but at the same time, when my bishop comes to my church for his visitation, he serves at the altar with LGBTQ people.
Right.
He meets with our vestry where there are LGBTQ people serving, and never once has he acted like they had cooties or
right.
Didn't acknowledge that their spouses were their spouses, or it's and I appreciate that about him, that it's not, he always encounters people as the people that are in front of them. At the same time, I want to be clear that as a church, as a denomination, we are not, our position on LGBTQ people is not because we think we're doing them a favor by including them in the church.
Right.
I preached about this on the last Sunday of Epiphany in kind of relationship to the Transfiguration.
Right.
LGBTQ people are welcome in the church because they are making the church better.
More of what it's supposed to be.
More of what it's supposed to be, more faithful, more holy. They are teaching us about the ways that patriarchy and misogyny and traditional gender roles have corrupted the church and made it less Christ-like, and are hopefully leading us towards, ridding ourselves of those things.
Right.
So, if somebody comes to my parish and they, do not think that gay people should be able to be married, whether in the church or kind of in civic life, they're not going to be very comfortable at my church.
Right.
They're certainly welcome there.
Right. And that's true. And by the way, that's true. We were just talking about high church, low church. Is a low church person welcome at a high church? Yeah. You just might not enjoy yourself much. Well, and what Leslie just said, you can be welcoming to both parties, but to stay, they need to not be intolerant towards all genders and sexual orientations. And she says that is exactly what I'm saying. You can come to Redeemer, but if there is a gay couple sitting in the pew next to you and they're holding hands, or one's leaning their head on the other one during the sermon or whatever, you have to be cool.
Yeah, or they kiss at the peace,
right.
or
Then be cool about it, right? Treat each other with respect. And I really genuinely think that's the thing. And I would just say to I want to be careful, because when we say get on board, understand that you're part of a church that's doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the question is there a space for you? There is, and the church is working to figure out how to be in relationship while trying to hold this line, right? But really the question is what kinds of relation, you're part of it on a local level, right? So if you believe that marriage is traditionally between male and female and shouldn't be having sex outside of marriage and all that, and you come to Redeemer, you're part of a church that doesn't espouse that, and you're welcome here. Now let's talk about the kinds of relationships you'll develop here.
Mm-hmm.
And how will you engage in this place? That's what's interesting to me, right? And if we focus on those personal relationships and focus on how you are able to contribute to your church and be a part of this place, that's what's interesting to me. Is it in a way that is respectful of people who differ from you on this, or is it in a way that's disrespectful or just like blind eyeing to it, right? And I want to be careful about, like, when in the language of like when Lisa says our traditional to right center people learning, I want to be careful that I say, like, it is not my job to change people's minds who think differently than me about this. It is my job to minister to them and to proclaim the gospel and to live into that gospel. But I'm not, it's like Lisa and I've had really good conversations about her understanding of who Jesus is and my understanding of who Jesus is. If I entered into those conversations with you, Lisa, like thinking it's my job to get you where I am, that would be really manipulative and really inauthentic and not respectful of where you are. Right? So how do I have a conversation with you and allow you to authentically be yourself about who you understand Jesus to be, while I am authentically myself about who I believe Jesus to be? And I would say I would extend that to our understanding of sexual ethics, sexual dynamics, orientation, gender identity, all those things. Like, the church is going to say, the Episcopal Church is going to guarantee at this point, finally, that LGBTQ plus persons have rights within the church, not rights in the world. That's a whole other conversation. Within the church, and are protected. Like, that their rights and their dignity is affirmed and protected and recognized, as Kira said, not because we're doing them a favor, but because that makes our whole church more what we believe church is meant to be. Within that, if you're in a different place than us about sexual ethics and sexual identity and orientation and gender identity and all of that, okay, you're here. And I hope that you find a place here. And you need to understand that we're going to make sure that everyone is treated with love and respect and dignity. Am I hitting it? I don't know. Like,
yeah, I mean, and are people learning? I mean, I'm learning. I've learned a lot over the last 10 years, particularly as it relates to trans people, to non-binary people, to gender identity. And part of that is through people I have come to know from the church. And I know of a number of people, particularly in past years, who have said, who have kind of come into the church with like, okay, I have a more traditional understanding of what marriage is.
right.
And then through the church, they've gotten to know same-sex couples, they've gotten to know LGBTQ people, and their positions have changed because they have been in relationship with people, they have prayed together, they have fed the hungry and housed the homeless together. And that to me is holy in a way that I think is really beautiful, because we all have kind of ideas that we've picked up from the world around us, in the same way that I know of a lot of stories of people who have been opposed to women's ordination. And then when they had a female priest who was there praying with them before their cancer surgery,
right,
they changed their mind a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So in some sense, we're all learning. We're all, I think the important part to me is to be open to that. Like, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do appreciate about my diocese, even as I disagree with my bishop on, these issues of what marriage is and LGBTQ people's place in the church, is that we're still in relationship. And I think he is a person of discernment and wisdom and prayer. And that's, it's not, oh, you're a homophobe and we can never talk again, or I don't respect you, or He respects the ministry that I do, and I respect the ministry that he does. And, we're even in the Diocese of Tennessee, like we are holding that tension.
Yes.
And it's hard and it sucks sometimes. And I get mad and my parishioners get mad.
Mm-hmm.
But we're doing it.
Well, and I mean, I think that relationships get hard. Any real relationship that's worth it and lasts has these times that are difficult. And so how do we stay in relationship with one another, and how do we privilege relationship with one another and care for one another? Now, I think it's important to state, because what Leslie said is important as well, that quote unquote traditional marriage people aren't being oppressed by accepting gay people. And the argument that you've heard that, for instance, that same-sex marriages will ruin marriage is on its face absurd. I won't even dignify it, frankly. But it's really important that we say, I want you to be able to hold on to being in a relationship with people who disagree with you, but I don't want that to be an abusive relationship where you are forced to stand up to withstand bigotry and be subjected to being treated as less than in any situation.
Absolutely.
So that's where the church, on a systemic level, I'm going to say, I want you to be in a situation where you're with people who are different than you, but I'm going to be the referee and make sure that you're being treated okay.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to, we had a person who would occasionally visit our church, and, I think he was kind of experiencing homelessness, and, but he would sometimes come into our church and he would use, slurs, both racial and kind of homophobic slurs. And I had to ask him to leave.
Right.
And to say, like, you are welcome here, but this behavior is not. And if you can't stop this behavior, then you need to leave.
Right. And so I think, like, I keep coming back to, like, we keep thinking oftentimes that you're either an individualist or a collectivist, that it's either personal or it's corporate. And the reality is that it's both, and very deeply, that we have a responsibility to create structures and systems that are just, and we have a responsibility to treat each other with humanity while we do it. And so the church on a systemic level believes, the Episcopal Church at this point, as a system, as a structure, as a institution, is proclaiming this equality across gender and sexuality understandings. Okay. How we live into that now is a local thing, and it's a constant working. It's a constant tending to relationship and care, and getting it wrong, and learning and evolving. And it's an ongoing process. I think the thing that I'm so grateful for you saying, Kira, the thing that I'm so grateful for you, there's many things today, but specifically when you said that the church hasn't moved to where it's moved because we're trying to do anybody favors. I would also say it shouldn't be. For some it might be, but it shouldn't be also because we're trying to identify as politically progressive or woke.
We want to be correct or woke.
Oh, current. Right. This is a theological understanding that people who are not, that God's blessing is not just found in cisgender heterosexual people, but also that we can understand that being with people outside of that sort of normative, historically normative reality, that they are expressions, that y'all are expressions of God's blessing and power, and your presence in the church makes the church more of what it is supposed to be. And that we believe that from a theological perspective. And if that happens to influence our politics, fine. But I'm not politically liberal, and therefore I believe this. I believe these things to be true, and I'll allow that to affect my politics however it has to. But I want to make that distinction because it's really important. right? That when we're serious about these things, they should cut across our political understandings. And when we think that Jesus is progressive or a socialist or a capitalist, we are in danger of making false idols and worshiping the God of our own image rather than recognizing that we are made in God's image. So I get nervous about that, but I don't know. I had a friend, I grew up in a different, as I've mentioned many times, in a different denomination, and the pastor that was my youth pastor at the time and now runs that church, he and I have remained friends. And he was telling me that he was relating to me that one of his parishioners was shocked to find out that he had a friend who was an Episcopal priest. and gasp, had grown up at that church, and now I'd left and gone to one of these apostate churches,
heretic churches.
And he said at the time, he probably knows where I stand on all these things now, but the guy's like, well, how does he feel about like women pastors, And he's like, I don't know how he feels about it. Well, what about, how about gay people? He's like, I don't know. Well, what does he think the Bible is? And he's like, well, I'm not sure exactly what Phil thinks the Bible is. He's like, well, what do you know? And he goes, I know he loves Jesus. And that shut the guy up real quick. So like, I want us to understand that for people like us, we are trying to love Jesus, and this is the way that we express that. And that really is the key for me. That it's an expression of our devotion to God. And that like, I don't know, that it keeps coming back to that. Our friend who asked this question also asked follow-up questions, which we will not get to today, about how the church may have gotten this wrong, why these splits happened, could they have been prevented, over the issues of same-sex marriage and same-sex relationship, about sexual ethics, essentially. Could the Episcopal Church have stayed together, or did it need to split into pieces? And I think those are worthy questions for us to discuss as well. Coming from a diocese that falls on the more quote unquote conservative end, but stuck around.
Yeah.
What does that look like? But we do have to wrap up. Sorry, I got a little preachy there at the end.
No, I wanted to give a little like, amen.
Preacher's gonna preach.
Preacher's gonna preach.
What have you been listening to this past week, Kira?
Okay, so first of all, I'm a big fan of like the Spotify playlist, and there was one for Valentine's Day that, to clarify, I am in a very happy marriage. I am in love with my husband, but this playlist is called Sad Bops, and it is just like up-tempo, sad heartbreak songs, which is kind of my jam. Also, I discovered this artist yesterday. I was like, oh, good. I have something to tell Phil about tomorrow. And it's a duo, but they go by Eliana. And
I'm looking them up right now.
It's Elliana, and their song Nirvana came up on a playlist, and I was like, ooh, I like this.
Oh, I've got it. I'm gonna listen to it. I'm gonna listen to it today. I'm gonna listen to it right away.
And it is just extremely my jam of like kind of poppy female vocals, but also like a kind of melancholic, it's in that sad bops category, which like
the sad bops.
You're an Enneagram 4, you know what I mean.
The melancholy is my jam, friend. A case of the sads. More Dylan. I forgot to mention last week that so my favorite Dylan album, it turns out, is Time Out of Mind, which is not one of his it's not like one of his like top 3 always people mention, but it's from 97 and it's my favorite Dylan album. And I have it on LP because I'm that guy. So I was listening to it on vinyl the other night while working on a puzzle because I'm super cool. I'm all kinds of cool. And
pandemic has made us all like 80-year-olds.
Yeah, and it's great because I do puzzle swapping with an 80-year-old. Yeah. I mean, it's literally right. She and I was literally sending her pictures of my puzzle last night, and she was sending me pictures of her puzzle, and we were like, isn't this great? And I'm so happy. So yes, 100%. Okay, so I'm gonna listen to Eliana. Okay, so that, and then a little T Swift. My daughter wanted to hear some T Swift, And so I threw on some T Swift. I don't need to make excuses for that.
No.
But she's leading the way.
Right.
I'm not saying, oh, I have to put up with it because of my daughter. She's leading the way and helping me open up to the splendor.
Yes.
That is Taylor Swift.
Yes.
And then I think those are the two big things. And then I got into I always go into little Randy Newman areas. He's one
My
of my
husband does a great Randy Newman impression that he'll occasionally like just bust out.
I preached on this once. One of the moments in my life that I regret the most was 3 years ago. I was 4 feet away from him and I didn't speak to him.
Oh, wow.
And I to this day, I preached on it once. Like, I don't regret a lot of things, which is my own hubris. But I not just thanking the man for what he means to me, is which he could have forgotten about the moment he walked away. But I didn't take that opportunity, and I to this day it kills me. So, but Randy Newman, Lil Dylan, Lil T Swift, it's been good. Oh, and I checked out Deary Blossom, who Blossom Deary, who I had heard 1 or 2 songs from, but I dug deeper in there. She's lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
I thought that would be your jam.
Yeah, I need to get into a better mood because I was in a really bad mood all week, and so she was almost too happy.
Yeah, it's a little too like.
I'm also not good at listening to music I don't know when I'm not happy.
Yeah.
If I'm miserable, I need to listen to music that I know really well.
Like your comfort.
And I've just had a really tough week, so it's mostly just been like sticking with the things that I know, watching movies I've already seen and listening to music I've already listened to, you know, and doing puzzles. All right, my friend, Kira, do we have an official way to end this show yet?
We don't, but we should remind people that we are always here on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, and we hope to see you next week. And you can submit your questions, comments,
however you want,
whatever you want to ask us.
One of us an email or a Facebook message or whatever. And
there's also a form on the Redeemer website.
Is there really?
Yes.
I mean, I knew that, and that's great. It is ever and always. It's like an evergreen privilege to work with you, Kira. You're a gift. And
thank you. Well, it is a pleasure and an honor and a blessing to be with you all. I love these questions. They're also smart and just thoughtful and wonderful to try and wrestle with and answer.
Yep, I love it. Look, there's the form right there on the chat, which I've always known about and I'm super excited about. Lisa, Gary, Betsy, Kathy, Ed, all of you who've joined us today, thank you so much for being a part of this. And remember, if you're listening to it later, you can always join in later. And Kira, I think the next thing that Kira and I are going to do at some point, we're gonna bring in some guests from time to time.
Yes.
So get ready for that, which really just means we have to figure out the technology for that.
Yeah, and I'm definitely on my post-pandemic list is coming up to Cincinnati. So
oh my gosh, and you know Nashville is always on my short list.
Yeah.
But I hope that you and your hubby will I just said hubby because I'm an 80-year-old now. I hope that you and your old man will join us in the Queen City sometime soon. It'll be really wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next week, everybody.